Welcome, everyone. Ready to dive deep into integrated pest management, or, as it's more commonly known, IPM.
IPM in cannabis cultivation, to be exact.
You got it. Today, we're talking all about keeping those cannabis plants happy and healthy, and, of course, pest-free.
Using environmentally friendly methods.
Of course, that's the whole point, right?
Mm-hmm.
We'll be taking a look at the Cannabis Grow Bible, the Cannabis Gardener, and the Beginner's Guide to Growing Cannabis for this one.
Sounds like we have a pretty solid lineup of resources.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in. I think one of the coolest things about IPM is that it goes beyond just getting rid of pests.
Yeah, it's not just about eradication.
Right. It's about creating this whole balanced ecosystem where your plants can thrive and any pests are kept in check naturally.
Exactly. IPM is all about understanding that you're not aiming to wipe out every single pest,
Right. More like minimizing their
but
impact.
also at the same time boosting your plant health.
It's a much more sustainable approach
And it's better for the environment.
and the quality of the cannabis.
And ultimately better for you.
And I think it's important to point out that IPM isn't some brand new concept,
No, it's been around for a while.
and it's becoming more and more relevant in modern agriculture.
Yeah, it's a response to the overuse of chemical pesticides.
Makes sense. A move toward a more balanced and mindful approach to working with nature.
Exactly. And this is especially important when we're talking about cannabis, where what we're growing is for consumption.
For sure. So to effectively combat an enemy, you have to know your enemy,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about some of the most common cannabis pests,
Understanding their life cycle and how to spot them early on is crucial.
like being a detective.
Exactly. The more you know about the suspect, the better equipped you are to stop them.
So who are our usual suspects? What are we looking out for in our cannabis garden?
Well, there are the tiny but mighty aphids
Those are the sapsuckers.
that can weaken your plants,
And then there are spider mites.
leaving their telltale webs as they munch away.
And what about whiteflies?
Those tiny white insects that congregate on the underside of leaves.
And then you've got caterpillars,
The munching machines.
capable of making quick work of your leaves.
And let's not forget about the enemies you can't always see.
The fungal diseases.
Like powdery mildew, which can look like a dusting of flour on your leaves.
And then there's botrytis.
The dreaded bud rot.
That one can turn your precious buds into a mushy mess.
It's not pretty.
Okay, they all sound pretty scary. But the good news is IPM can help us tackle these issues before they become major problems
That's the beauty of prevention.
by creating a healthy growing environment
You're setting your plants up for success.
and making them less susceptible to all these invaders.
Exactly. It's all about creating the right foundation.
The cannabis gardener really emphasizes that healthy soil is key.
And it makes sense, right? Healthy soil, rich in beneficial microorganisms, provides all the nutrients and support that cannabis plants need to thrive.
It's like building a solid foundation for a house.
The stronger the foundation, the better it can withstand any storm.
The book also talks about how important proper watering techniques are,
Overwatering can create a damp environment.
that certain pests and diseases just love,
And good airflow is also crucial.
especially for preventing fungal diseases.
Good airflow helps keep the leaves dry, making it harder for those fungal spores to take hold.
One of the growers featured in the book, Kate Gaudette, she's a big fan of mulching.
Mulch is a great strategy.
She basically blankets the soil around her plants with a thick layer of mulch,
It helps stabilize soil temperatures, conserve moisture, and even suppress weeds.
which can sometimes harbor pests.
And as it breaks down, mulch enriches the soil with organic matter.
And then there's companion planting.
Planting different species together.
Yeah, the Cannabis Grow Bible mentions planting garlic onions or marigolds alongside cannabis as a natural pest repellent.
Using the natural properties of plants to protect your cannabis.
It's like having a little army of plant protectors.
Certain plants release chemicals that deter specific pests, and we can use that to our advantage.
So we've talked about building up defenses, but what happens when the pests do show up?
That's where natural remedies come in.
Like having a natural pharmacy for your plants.
For instance, insecticidal soaps can be very effective against soft-bodied insects like aphids.
They basically dehydrate and kill the insects,
And then you have neem oil, a broad-spectrum pesticide.
which can tackle a wide range of pests, including mites, whiteflies, and even some fungal diseases.
Neem oil disrupts their hormonal systems, preventing them from feeding and reproducing.
And for crawling insects, Beginner's Guide to Growing Cannabis suggests diatomaceous earth.
It's a natural powder that dehydrates insects on contact,
Like tiny shards of glass.
piercing their exoskeletons.
Pretty brutal when you think about it.
But it is a natural and effective solution.
Even with natural remedies, though, it's important to remember that you still have to apply them carefully.
And always follow the instructions.
We don't want to harm any beneficial insects.
Or the environment.
Speaking of beneficial insects, this next part is really cool.
It's like something straight out of a superhero movie.
We can actually enlist beneficial insects as allies in our gardens,
It's a great example of biological control.
where we use nature's own predators to help us keep those pest populations in check.
For example, ladybugs, those cute little red beetles with black spots, are like tiny aphid-eating machines.
So they're our friends?
Definitely. And predatory mites are incredibly effective against spider mites.
So it's like a microscopic battle happening right in your garden.
With the good guys on your side.
But I imagine it's important to be careful about where you get those beneficial insects.
Absolutely. You don't want to accidentally introduce any unwanted species.
So always go for reputable suppliers when sourcing beneficial insects.
That way, you know you're getting healthy, effective predators that won't disrupt the balance of your garden's ecosystem.
Okay, so we've covered knowing your enemy, building a strong defense with healthy soil and companion planting, using natural remedies, and even bringing in reinforcements in the form of beneficial insects. What's the final piece of the IPM puzzle?
Monitoring and observation.
Makes sense.
IPM isn't something you just set up and forget about.
Right. It's an ongoing process.
It requires vigilance.
And consistent monitoring to make sure those pests don't gain a foothold.
It's like being a doctor regularly checking up on your patients to make sure they're healthy.
So we're talking about regularly inspecting our plants, looking for any signs of infestation.
Early detection is key.
If you catch a problem early,
It's much easier to manage and prevent it from spreading.
it's much easier to put out a small fire than a raging inferno.
The Cannabis Grow Bible recommends using sticky traps to monitor flying insects.
Like whiteflies and fungus gnats,
They can be really helpful, and of course you can visually inspect your plants,
looking for any signs of disease.
like powdery mildew or discolored leaves,
And understanding the life cycle of common pests is also really helpful.
because it allows you to anticipate potential outbreak.
Like knowing that aphids reproduce rapidly in warm conditions, you can be extra vigilant during those periods.
Exactly.
This is all great information. It really feels like IPM is about giving growers the knowledge and the tools to take control of their gardens in a way that's both effective and sustainable.
I agree.
It's about working with nature, understanding the balance of the ecosystem.
And taking a proactive approach to create a thriving cannabis garden.
We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've explored the principles of IPM-identified common cannabis pests and diseases, and even talked about some natural remedies and beneficial insects. We'll pick up right where we left off in the next part of our deep dive, so stay tuned,
Welcome back to our deep dive into integrated pest management,
where we're exploring how to cultivate healthy and vibrant cannabis plants.
while minimizing our impact on the environment.
So in the last part, we really got into the foundational principles of IPM.
The what and the why.
Yeah, exactly. Now I want to get practical.
Let's talk about the how.
How do we actually put all this knowledge into action?
Well, the thing is, IPM isn't a one-size-fits-all solution.
Okay, so what works for one grower might not work for another.
Exactly. Each growing environment, each plant variety presents unique challenges.
So it's about understanding those challenges.
It's about becoming a student of your garden,
I like that.
really paying attention to the nuances,
This is like being a detective,
gathering information,
analyzing the clues.
coming up with a plan of attack tailored to that specific situation.
I like that analogy. So the Cannabis Grow Bible actually outlines a step-by-step approach.
That can guide us in our IPM journey.
Okay, so let's break that down. What's the first step?
It always starts with prevention,
Okay,
creating a healthy growing environment. That's your foundation
it's like building a fortress.
to keep those invaders at bay.
So we're talking healthy soil, proper watering,
Good airflow.
companion planting.
All of that comes into play. The stronger your plant's defenses, the less susceptible they are to pests and diseases.
So we've built our fortress. What's next?
Then comes the detective work.
Monitoring.
Exactly. You need to regularly inspect your plants for any signs of pests or diseases.
Okay, so we're looking for anything unusual.
Telltale webs discolored leaves unusual growth patterns.
Early detection is key, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The sooner you spot a problem, the easier it is to manage.
It's much easier to put out a small fire than a raging inferno.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Mm.
So say you're doing your inspections and you do spot a problem.
What then?
Then it's time for identification.
Okay.
You need to figure out exactly what you're dealing with.
Aphids, spider mites, fungal disease.
Getting it right is crucial.
Because different pests require different treatment methods.
Once you've identified the culprit,
It's time to choose your weapons.
exactly.
Yeah.
And in IPM, we're talking about non-toxic, eco-friendly options.
Like insecticidal soaps, neem oil diatomaceous earth.
And of course, beneficial insects.
Right. Nature's little helpers.
The key is to experiment and see what works best for your situation.
There's no magic bullet.
But by trying different approaches and observing the results, you'll figure out what's most effective in your garden.
So we're all like scientists,
Conducting experiments,
collecting data.
finding the best solutions.
I like that.
Yeah.
And speaking of data, documentation is another crucial aspect of IPM.
Absolutely. Keeping a record of your observations
The treatments you use.
and the results you get. This can help you track patterns, refine your IPM plan, and become a more knowledgeable grower over time,
It's like a garden journal.
chronicling your battles
And triumphs.
in the fight against pests.
I love that. Okay, so we've walked through the steps of implementing IPM. Seems pretty straightforward.
It is, once you get the hang of it.
But are there any downsides?
Well, IPM does require a greater investment of time and attention.
Compared to just spraying with chemical pesticides.
It's definitely a more hands-on approach.
But it's more rewarding too, right?
Absolutely.
But
It's about building a relationship with your plants, understanding their signals, and responding accordingly.
You become a caretaker.
Not just a cultivator.
And that takes time.
Patience.
And a willingness to learn.
And while IPM is generally very effective, it's not always a quick fix.
Right.
Some pests can be quite persistent,
Sure.
and it might take a combination of approaches to really get them under control.
It's about playing the long game,
Creating a healthy, balanced ecosystem.
where pests are minimized and your plants can thrive.
Exactly.
That's the essence of IPM, isn't it?
It is. It's about working in harmony with nature, respecting the balance of the ecosystem, and nurturing your plants to reach their full potential.
Less about control and more about understanding.
In collaboration with nature.
I like that. So before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, let's just recap some of those key takeaways about putting IPM into practice.
We start with prevention, building that strong foundation for our plants.
Then we become detectives.
Monitoring for any signs of trouble.
We identify the culprit and choose our weapons.
From our arsenal of eco-friendly options.
And finally, we document our findings.
Learning and refining our approach with each growing season.
By following these steps, we can create thriving cannabis gardens while minimizing our impact on the environment.
Now, in the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore some specific examples of IPM techniques in action.
Drawing on the wisdom from our trusted sources,
We'll also talk about some common challenges
based by cannabis growers.
and share some practical tips to help you navigate them successfully.
Stay tuned. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into integrated pest management.
We've covered a lot of ground so far.
Yeah, we've talked about the principles, the why, the how.
Now it's time to get down to the nitty-gritty.
Let's talk solutions.
Practical examples.
Problem solving using IPM strategies.
Exactly. Let's get specific.
Perfect. Because I know there are some common cannabis growing challenges that a lot of people struggle with.
Oh, for sure. Like powdery mildew?
Oof, yes, that's a tough one.
It's a fungal disease that thrives in those humid conditions,
And it can spread so quickly.
leaving that white powdery coating on leaves and buds.
It's like a stealthy attacker that can really take over if you're not careful.
Luckily, there are some effective IPM solutions.
Okay, so what does the IPM approach recommend for powdery mildew?
Well, the Beginner's Guide to Growing Cannabis suggests a really simple but effective method.
I'm listening.
Increasing the pH on the leaf surface?
So we're making the leaves less hospitable to powdery mildew.
Exactly, creating an environment where the fungus can't thrive.
Okay, so how do we raise the pH on the leaves?
The book recommends using topical sprays during the vegetative growth phase.
Sprays that raise the pH.
That's right, something that will bring it up to above 8.
Are there specific products they mention?
They recommend a potassium bicarbonate product called Millstop.
And I'm guessing there are other similar products available.
Absolutely, you can find them at most garden centers.
And potassium bicarbonate has the added bonus of being a nutrient for the plants.
Exactly, it's a win-win.
But I imagine there's a catch.
Well, you have to avoid spraying during the flowering phase.
Yeah, we don't want any residue on those precious buds.
Definitely not.
Speaking of bud-related woes, let's talk about botrytis.
No, bud rot.
That's the one that can really break a grower's heart.
It can ruin an entire crop.
It attacks the buds and just turns them into a mushy mess.
Often right when they're plump and almost ready to harvest.
A nightmare scenario for sure. So how can IPM help with preventing botrytis?
The Cannabis Grow Bible emphasizes the importance of airflow.
Makes sense, it's a fungus.
It loves those stagnant, humid conditions.
So good air circulation is key,
Think of it like a refreshing breeze.
keeping those buds dry and less susceptible to that fungal growth,
Exactly. So make sure you have good ventilation in your grow space.
especially during the flowering phase when those buds are getting nice and dense.
Right, and the book also recommends doing regular inspections, especially after rain or periods of high humidity,
Looking for any signs of trouble.
discoloration, wilting anything that looks off.
Early detection is key here too.
Absolutely, if you find any infected buds,
Remove them right away.
to prevent the spread.
And when you're disposing of any infected plant material, make sure to do it far away from your grow area.
You don't want to risk recontamination.
No lingering spores causing more trouble.
Nope.
All right, so we've covered some of the fungal challenges. Now let's talk about insects.
The insect world can be a tricky one.
Definitely a mix of friends and foes.
It's for sure,
Let's
yeah.
start with aphids.
Those tiny sapsuckers.
They can infest a plant so quickly.
And cause stunted growth and distorted leaves.
Not good. The cannabis gardener recommends a pretty simple method
A strong jet of water.
to blast those aphids right off the plants.
Just give them a power wash eviction notice.
I love that. If that doesn't work, what are our other options?
Insecticidal soaps or neem oil can also be effective.
But again, we want to avoid using those during the flowering phase.
I want any residue on the buds.
And don't forget about our little ladybug friends.
They are aphid-eating machines.
Nature's pest control.
Exactly.
Now what about spider mites?
Another common adversary,
They can do a lot of damage.
leaving those telltale webs and stippled leaves.
The Cannabis Grow Bible recommends fighting fire with fire.
Using predatory mites to combat the spider mites.
So we're bringing in the big guns.
A specialized army of mite-eating mites.
They're like a microscopic security force protecting your garden.
They target the spider mites without harming your cannabis plants.
But just like with any beneficial insects, we have to make sure we're getting them from a good source.
Absolutely, a reputable supplier.
So we know we're introducing the right kind of allies into our ecosystem.
Couldn't agree more.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to reiterate the core of IPM.
Becoming a student of your garden.
That's such a great way to put it.
It's about taking the time to observe your plants.
Understand their unique needs.
And create that healthy, balanced ecosystem.
And that means continuous learning, right?
Absolutely.
Exploring local resources.
Connecting with experienced growers.
Staying updated on the latest IPM techniques.
There's always something new to learn.
And the Beginner's Guide to Growing Cannabis reminds us that we're all part of a larger ecosystem.
Our choices have consequences.
It's a good reminder that IPM is about more than just protecting our plants.
It's about cultivating a more sustainable and harmonious relationship with nature.
Exactly. IPM is a journey.
A journey of learning and discovery.
Working with nature, not against it.
Creating a thriving cannabis garden that benefits both the plants and the environment.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into integrated pest management.
We've covered a lot of ground.
From the basic principles to practical tips and problem-solving strategies.
We hope you feel empowered to implement IPM in your own cannabis garden.
Remember, it's all about observation, experimentation, and continuous learning.
Find what works best for you and your plants.
Happy growing, everyone.